I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ann Linde, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden.
Madam President, Excellencies, times of crisis require the best of us. When warnings sound, action must follow. Only then will development have sustainable and pace maintained. Honest reflection on the gravity of the challenges must be followed by determined commitments to address them. That is what respecting the UN Charter means and what multilateralism is all about. Madam President, we are all aware of the immense task facing us. Almost 350 million people in more than 80 countries face acute food insecurity, trying to merely survive the day instead of making plans for tomorrow. Some 50 million people in 45 countries are on the brink of starvation. Progress on the Sustainable Development Goals is halting, leaving millions of women, men and children behind. Extreme poverty is on the rise for the first time in 2 decades. The world is in the midst of an accelerating climate and environmental crisis, and the effects on the ongoing pandemic continue to afflict individuals and in societies around the world. A permanent member of the Security Council has launched an unprovoked, unjustified and illegal aggression against a neighboring country. This was done in blatant disregard of its international obligation and the human suffering that extends far beyond the immediate war zone. Madam President, as UN member states, we also know what is required of us. The General Assembly has come together to demand that Russia immediately, completely and unconditionally withdraw all of its military forces from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized border. The General Assembly has reaffirmed Ukrainian sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. Today, Sweden reiterates this demand in the strongest possible terms alongside other EU member states, transatlantic partners and countries around the globe. The war in Ukraine must stop and Russia's troops withdraw. The fake referenda on Ukrainian territory would be illegal and will have no effect. Neither partial mobilization, the appalling use of nuclear threats, nor any escalation will deter us from supporting Ukraine. Humanitarian law and principle must be upheld, and Ukraine's nuclear power plants protected from Russia's illegal and reckless attacks. Accountability for the heinous crimes committed must be ensured. International law must be upheld and decisions by the UN bodies respected. Madam President, Russia's aggression has severely escalated the food security, energy and financial crisis. Governments and societies already struggling to cope with the consequences of climate change, conflicts and the pandemic now face even more serious challenges. Because of the actions of one country, more than 1.5 billion people in more than half of the UN member states find themselves at greater risk of poverty, starvation and indebtedness. In short, the global relief, recovery and resilience needs are immense. Sweden and the EU have scaled up our own contribution to meet them. To save lives and alleviate suffering where needs are the greatest, Sweden has increased its humanitarian assistance to a record high $950 million this year. We commend the efforts of the UN Secretary General and the President of Turkey on the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Under the initiative, some 50,000 tons of wheat will, thanks partly to Swedish funding, soon leave the port of Odessa, bound for millions of women, men and children at risk of famine in Yemen. A significant part of Sweden's ambitious aid budget has been directed to the UN as an investment in global peace, security and development, and the multilateral system itself. Our actions are firmly anchored in the 2030 agenda with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, which are now more important than ever. It is time to raise our ambition and accelerate action to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss, or will fail not only future generations, but also our own. At the international meeting in Stockholm, +50 in June, countries came together to follow through on the recommendations and actions. Sweden has spearheaded the climate transition through innovation and green investments and an ambitious increase in climate aid. Mounting evidence show that climate change also leads to greater risks to peace and stability. A solid foundation for advancing climate security is in place at the UN and in regional organizations. The OSCE took key decisions last year during the Swedish chairpersonship, and the EU is scaling up. The nuclear threat is alarmingly present, and Russia's action over the threshold, in lowering the threshold, is a way that increases the threat that is facing us all. In January this year, the leader of all 5 nuclear weapon states committed to the prevention of nuclear war and avoiding arms race. They affirmed that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Russia's irresponsible action and nuclear rhetoric since then severely undermines the credibility of its commitments on this pledge. It is also deeply troubling that Russia broke consensus on the draft outcome of the NPT review conference. The countries of the Stockholm Initiative have presented ideas to head a call from the UN Secretary General to bring disarmament and non-proliferation back to the top of the international agenda. Madam President, the world is in a gender equality recession. Regrettably, the rights, resources, and representation of women still cannot be taken for granted. Violence against women and girls has increased. Access to safe and legal abortion has suffered major setbacks. And 1 year after the Taliban takeover, the situation for women and girls in Afghanistan has turned into a nightmare in an unparalleled system of discrimination. At the same time, more and more states are acknowledging that a gender perspective is needed to meet global challenges. As we gather for the first in-person UNGA high-level week since the outbreak of the COVID-19, we must do everything in our power to prevent another pandemic. Sweden and the EU have made substantial contribution to global vaccination. Last year alone, Sweden committed over $600 million to global health. The Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response has set out clear recommendations for action. We should make use of them. Madam President, a year ago, the UN Secretary General presented his blueprint for a modern multilateral system. Our common agenda is an accelerator of the SDGs, a launchpad for a new agenda for peace, and a way towards a more inclusive, modern, and networked UN. It was us member states who called for the report, and as member state, we should do our collective best to act upon it. The establishment of a new youth office is a fitting first decision. This is an agenda for the future, and the Transforming Education Summit earlier this week was another important step towards implementation. We look forward to similar progress on other recommendations, from investments in peace building and strategic foresight to digitalization and a global economy that benefits all by being fair and open. We must keep up the momentum until we realize our ambitions at the Summit for the Future in 2024. Madam President, Russia's aggression against Ukraine has caused the greatest refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War. aggravating the already serious refugee situation globally. This military invasion of a country in our neighborhood, in violation of the very same international law that is protected us all from aggression, has also fundamentally changed Sweden's security environment. In response to this seriously deteriorated security situation, the Swedish government decided on the 16th of May to apply for NATO membership. The decision has broad national support and was made following extensive consultation among political parties. It was taken in tandem with Finland, and the decision is anchored in a firm belief that security is best built together with others. When I signed our formal request for the NATO membership, I noted the fundamental changes to our defense and security policy. But I also stress the importance of the continuity of an ambitious global and multilateral foreign policy. This enduring global commitment is also reflected in the common foreign and security policy of the EU. During the first half of 2023, Sweden will hold the presidency of the Council of the European Union. We look forward to further strengthening the EU's global role and deepening cooperation with partners around the world. We will work to protect, promote and defend democratic principles, human rights and the rule of law. And we reinforce the already solid EU-UN relationship to seek multilateral solutions. We lend our full support to Denmark's candidacy to serve as an elected member of the UN Security Council in 2025 to 26. Their campaign message, equality, security, action, is a message from all the Nordic countries. Madam President, it must be safe to work for peace, security, development and human rights. So far this year, there have been 176 attacks against humanitarian workers and 47 have been killed. More than 50 peacekeepers have lost their lives while serving in UN missions. A few months ago, the UN Secretary General and I inaugurated a work of art in this very building in memory of Zaida Catalan and Michael Sharp, who were murdered while working in the UN in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In too many countries, civil society representatives, human rights defenders and journalists are threatened, subjected to violence or even killed for expressing their opinions or reporting on current events. The global trend of democratic backsliding must be reversed, and the vicious circle of lack of democracy, disrespect for human rights and disregard of the rule of law broken. Investing in democracy means investing in peace and sustainable development. Efforts must continue to bring clarity to the circumstances of the death of the former Secretary General of the UN, Dag Hammarskjöld, and his crew. We fully support the work of the UN-appointed independent investigator. Madam President, to echo the topic of this debate, we are at a watershed moment. We are witnessing a full-scale war in Europe. Across the globe, armed conflict and repression cause suffering and halts development. We are not doing enough to tackle the climate crisis. Too many people are facing hunger, being forced to flee from their homes, dying from curable diseases, and living in fear or under oppression. We, the United Nations, must make sure there is a different story to tell next year. It won't be easy, but it is possible if we had to call to meet in interlocking challenges with transformative change. If we act when warning sounds. Thank you very much.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden.